Welcome to Olivia's Blooms. If you are new to my channel, I'm gardening in Charlottesville, Virginia, Zone 7B. I'm a home gardener who loves growing my own cut flowers and home decor with a focus on sustainable, regenerative, and eco-friendly practices. But most importantly, I'm here to support, share with, and learn from other gardeners. So I hope you will join me in growing this amazing gardening community. Hey guys, welcome back to Olivia's Blooms. Today's video is about deciding what flowers you're gonna grow. My first video went through all the information you need and then picking a growing space. Now we're doing the fun part. We are going to figure out what flowers we're growing in our cutting garden this year, but I'm gonna give you some tips to make sure that you have success. So the first thing I'm gonna do is just give you a few pieces again of information you're going to want before you decide what you're going to grow, and then I'll talk through some great flowers to start with if you're brand new, and what you can do with different amounts of equipment. Again, you don't need a ton of seed starting equipment to grow your own cut flowers, but you certainly can invest in that if it's something you want to do. Okay, but before we get started, I had some anemones blooming in early March, which blows my mind because that's so early for around here. And here's a daffodil that the bud got frozen, but I still like that yellow color. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. I'm doing some vase life tests on these since they're too early to pair with anything else, and I'll probably test these in my cooler, but just wanted you to get to see these lovely blooms. All right, so let's start with just a couple basics. So there are different types of flowers, and you're going to want to know a little bit about what type you're growing to ensure that you have good results. So the first thing to consider is this flower a one and done, or is it a cut and come again? And what do those things mean? So a one and done flower means when you plant that seed or that plant, you will get one flower out of it. Classic example is sunflowers. But another flower you may not know that's one and done is stock. So when you plant that plant, you get one flower out of it and that's it. Then there are cut and come again flowers. A good example are snapdragons or zinnias, where the more you cut them, the more they flower. Now some cut and come again flowers, you might get 3 to 5 total stems off of one plant, and some you can cut and come again from the moment they bloom until they're killed by frost or cold. So it's important to kind of think through that. The reason that's important is you might want to do something called succession planting, which means planting them in a succession instead of planting them all at once. So think about sunflowers. If you want to have sunflowers for your bunches or bouquets, then you might want to plant one row of them every week or every other week, so that every few weeks you have new sunflowers to cut instead of having 200 in one weekend that you have to use. Another thing to consider is what kind of arrangements do you want to make? You can make bunches. Bunches are just groups of the same flowers. So if you just want to do some sunflower bunches or some zinnia bunches, very simple, you only need to grow one type of flower, and that's the flower that you want to bunch. But if you want to do bouquets, it's really good to think through different types of flowers that you're going to want to grow to make a bouquet. You can keep it really simple and have a focal flower, a filler flower, and something that you absolutely want to grow that is often overlooked or just not thought through that makes a huge difference is foliage. I'll never forget when I made my first bouquet and I just couldn't understand why it didn't look right, and I watched other people making bouquets and I realized the foliage just ties it all together. It gives it that beautiful full look, and you need to grow foliage. So if you want to make, again, bouquets, make sure you have a focal flower, a filler, or you can use disc flower or a spike flower for the filler. It doesn't have to be super complicated, and a foliage. If you want to go all out and get really into the bouquet making, there's a lot of different recipes out there. Florette recommends, and I love her recipe, I don't think you can go wrong. She recommends one focal flower, one disc-shaped flower, so flower that's like a circle, a flat circle, one spike flower, one or two secondary flowers, which are smaller flowers that aren't as big as the focal, and then foliage. So what types of flowers are focal flowers? What types of flowers are secondary? You know, that's not always immediately obvious. So a focal flower is one that is usually the largest flower. It usually catches your eye. It tends to be really stunning. But honestly, any kind of flower that you love can be a focal flower. A focal flower usually will not get lost. It's the first one you tend to look at. You can think of it that way. Common focal flowers are sunflowers, zinnias, dahlias, roses, but it depends sometimes too on the other flowers you use in your bouquet. Some very common cut flower spikes are larkspur, snapdragon, delphinium, some tall celosias. Spike amaranth can be a nice spike flower, especially in the fall. Some nice disc-shaped flowers are ami, which is dill, flowering carrot, such as dara, orlea, yarrow. But anything that you find, Queen Anne's lace is also a common one. Anything you find that has that disc shape. And what's nice about those is they take up a lot of room in the bouquet, so they make the bouquet look bigger and more full. And then some common secondary flowers, which are smaller flowers that complement the focals, but they're also beautiful, include things like straw flower, nigella. There's so many secondary flowers. Gomphrena is a common one that I like to use. Smaller celosias, even some smaller zinnias like the Oklahoma zinnia that have a really small head that you can use as secondaries. I've even used some really small ball dahlias known as the small world as secondary flowers. So sometimes the size dictates whether the flower is secondary or a focal flower. Foliage can be probably the hardest part if you're brand new. You might not know what to use, and not all foliage that you see out in your garden will have a good vase life, so that's really important. One of my favorites, and if you watch a lot of my videos, this will come as no surprise, one of my favorites is actually basil. Basil, if you let it hydrate long enough and you cut it at a good time, will last a really long time in the vase. It adds an amazing scent. It is so easy to grow from seed. And bonus, whatever I strip off, I use as, for culinary purposes. I love to make pesto and I love to make basil vinaigrette. So to me, that's an easy one to pick, and it comes in all sorts of cool colors, not just the typical green. There's gorgeous purples, purplish green. I grew this dark opal basil that had hints of both purple and green, and I'll put some pictures up. So beautiful. And even the flowers on the basil can be a nice touch if you want to go for a more airy, more wild, cottagey looking bouquet. So that one's one of my favorites. A lot of herbs actually make good fillers. So other common ones are mint, sage is a really good one, and some people grow oregano. But what you're gonna wanna consider if you are going to grow herbs and things like basils for foliage is make sure that it is an ornamental type or one that gets tall. You don't wanna get a really short growing oregano. That's not gonna make good filler for your bouquet. Another easy thing to do, and I think is a good long-term investment if you really want to grow your own cut flowers, is if you don't have a lot of room in your actual, let's say, raised bed, but you've got some room in your landscape, buy some shrubs. There are a lot of shrubs out there that make great filler. So I put out in my landscape some 9-bark. 9-bark comes again in a lot of different colors. You might have to wait a few years before you can cut a lot of the branches off, but it also has beautiful flowers in the spring. That's a really popular one to use as your foliage. I've also used privet bushes. I love those green glossy leaves, and privet has some really pretty flowers actually, and I found that it lasts a really long time in the vase. One of the gardeners that I follow, but I've never tried this myself, swears by forsythia foliage, not those beautiful yellow flowers, but the foliage that comes after. So you might already have that in your yard, and you can actually cut those branches and use them as a beautiful foliage accent for your bouquets too. There are tons of other shrubs out there that make good cut flowers. And so if you want to go that route, put some in your landscape. Maybe do a little more research and find out what's the best one. If you've got a lot of shade too, I know that North Lawn Flower Farm, she's the one who uses the forsythia foliage. She also swears by Solomon's seal, which is a shade-loving plant, is a great foliage plant, and those leaves are beautiful, variegated leaves. But you want to make sure, whatever direction you want to go, that you've got all the elements you need to make a bouquet, if that's your intent. The next thing you also need to make sure is that those flowers are going to be blooming at the same time. And you can control that a little bit by making sure, if let's say your sunflowers take 60 days, sunflowers only take 45 to 55 days, so they grow really fast. But your accent flowers might take longer. So let's say straw flowers need a lot, they need 100 days. You're going to want to wait to plant your sunflowers until they're going to be blooming around the time of your other flowers. But you definitely don't want to be trying to pair flowers that love the cold weather and are going to bloom in the cold weather, such as larkspur, your stock. You don't want to be pairing those with dahlias, which are going to bloom at the end of the summer. So that's, again, why it's important to know what type of conditions does that flower like. Or if you don't want to have to worry about that, you can plant those cut and come again flowers like zinnias and snapdragons that are going to bloom for you all season. So you don't have to think through, will they be blooming at the right time? But it does limit your creativity and the amount of things you can grow. It's also important to look at the variety. Again, I talked a little bit about this in the first video, but look at the variety of flowers you're growing, because sunflowers are a great example of this. Some of them are meant to be grown on so you can have a huge giant seed head and actually eat the seeds themselves. So those are bred to have giant, huge heads, like the Mammoth series is a good example of that. And they're meant to have delicious, large edible seeds. Other sunflowers were specifically bred for using in bouquets. The Pro Cut series is a great example of that. And those flowers were bred to flower faster. So those flower in 55 to 65 days, which you don't necessarily care about if you're growing a large crop for farming the seed itself. They're also pollenless, which is huge. Think about when you have a bouquet, you don't want it dropping pollen everywhere. And those sunflowers are also tend to be smaller size heads. You can control that a little bit with how far you space them. And the colors, they come in a much broader range of colors. So look at the type of flower you're growing and make sure it's meant for cut flowers. Again, if you go to a website like Johnny's Seeds, it's very easy. You just sort by cut flowers, and then you can look at the sunflowers in that section. The last thing to think through that is important when you are going to be making bouquets, less important when you're doing bunches, is the size of your flowers. So you're gonna want to pair smaller flowers with other relatively sized flowers. And I say that because when I grew those lilies, that second year, I had gigantic lilies that were this big, and almost nothing I could put with them looked good. So a tiny straw flower that's flower head is this size, it's not gonna look good in a bouquet with a lily. It's gonna look too small. The only thing I could potentially have paired with that were some bigger sunflower heads if I had spaced mine out. Dinner plate dahlias, they're so fun to grow. I do grow one dinner plate size called Emery Paul, but I almost exclusively pair her with other Emery Pauls just to have bunches of that giant dahlia head, because she's really not gonna be able to make a good bouquet because nothing else really fits her size. So think about that. And then also think about, you want things in that bouquet that are gonna take up space. So if you are gonna be growing some smaller flowers, like some smaller zinnias, Maybe you want a fluffy disc. It doesn't have to be a huge disc, but a fluffy disc to fill out the rest of that bouquet. And if you're gonna grow foliage, make sure you are growing foliage that tends to be bigger, and sometimes some foliage will have multiple stems or multiple parts on one stem versus a skinnier foliage stem, like a mint, for example, is usually just gonna be skinny and tall. But those all work in different situations. Just think through what size flowers you're gonna have and how they're going to look together. The last thing you wanna consider before you start buying your flowers and planning what you're gonna grow is, do you wanna grow from seed? Do you wanna grow from bulb? Or do you wanna buy a plant? And obviously there's pros and cons to all of those. Growing from seed tends to be the least expensive. You have a lot more options out there about what types of varieties, especially when it comes to cut flowers. If you wanna buy plants and grow from there, the plants you find at garden centers and local nurseries tend to be more landscape focused, so you really have to search hard and make sure you're finding a plant that gets tall enough and has a good vase life. It's harder to find cut varieties grown on from plants, but if you really want to go the plant route and you don't mind spending a little extra money, there are websites that sell plugs, which is a small plant that they ship you in the mail that you can plant out into your landscape. So they've just started that seed for you and gotten it a healthy start. So you can certainly do that. The downside to buying plugs is you tend to have to buy a large quantity at once, probably at least 100, if not 250 plants. And for your home purposes, you may or may not need that many, but if you've got flower buddies, maybe you guys can share the cost and share the plants. So that might be a fun route to go. And a very popular, gorgeous cut flower that I'm considering buying plugs from are Lysianthus. They're easy to start from seed, but they take forever. You have to start them in December to get flowers by the end of the summer the following year. So they're often bought by plugs. Bulbs are an easy one. You just want to make sure, again, that you're paying attention to what time of year they want to be planted and how long they take to flower. So for example, you don't want to be planting tulips and daffodils right now here in March in the spring because they need that overwintering period to be able to flower. You can start, dahlias are a great one to start by bulb, and you can usually find those bulbs at your local garden centers. A bulb is just sort of like a seed, but it's almost a plant that's gone dormant that you can put in the soil and it will flower for you, typically, usually that year. Some bulbs, like lilies, if you plant them too late, I planted bulbs my first year growing flowers in May, and I did not get lilies that year, but the next year I got gorgeous, huge lilies. Gladiolas are a great bulb to start. And then ranunculus and anemones, so this is the anemones that I grew. These also can be started with, they're called corms in this case, but it's essentially the same thing as a bulb. And they're a little more complicated because you usually want to pre-sprout them ahead of time. You don't have to though, but depending on where you live, you might want to plant yours in the fall versus the spring. Some of you in colder climates though could probably still start some anemones and ranunculus. These love to grow on and bloom in the cooler spring weather. And then of course, you want to think through the colors. To me, that's the fun part. What colors are going to look good together? If you really want to get, deep into it, you can think of, having more summer pastels, lighter colors in the beginning of the summer and then moving into more fall. So that's kind of a benefit too of doing successions. And I'll use sunflowers again because they're such a great cut flower to start with. But you can start, and I'm going to be doing this year, I'm going to start with some of the lighter Pro Cut White Light, White Night flowers. Then I'm going to move into the oranges for the heat of the summer, and then into the fall, I'm going to be doing some more of the darker, some of the reds. And because I'm doing successions, I can buy a little bit of each seed, and I can get that variety with the one and done, which is the benefit of having the one and done flowers versus the cut and come again, where it's going to be the same flower over and over again. Okay, so you've thought through what you want to grow and how you want to grow it. But if you're going to grow from seed, the last thing you need to just think through is, do I need to direct sow this seed, which means sow it directly in the ground, or do I need to start it indoors? Now I'm gonna say right now, you don't need seed starting equipment. You don't need to start seeds indoors to have a beautiful cutting garden. I'm gonna give out some really easy, direct sown, warm season cut flowers that you can start with this year if all you have is a growing space. But if you wanna invest in seed starting equipment, there are also some great flowers. I'll talk through a few that you will want to start inside, either because they're just really small or they're a little bit hard to germinate. Or you can start flowers inside if you just want to give yourself a head start on your season, if you can't wait to have flowers, or if you have a short growing season. But you do not need to start seeds indoors, again, to grow beautiful flowers and make beautiful bouquets. I am going to put a link down below to a great video by Laura from Garden Answer that talks through her favorite easy direct sown cut flower seeds. I'm going to share my own. A lot of them are the same, but I think she does a great job showing you pictures and talking through her experience. She's in different growing conditions than I am. I'm also going to say there's a really fun method to start a lot of seeds. Not every seed will work with this method, but a lot of seeds that especially like cold periods, you can use the winter sowing method, which is just saving a container like a milk jug, a milk carton, or a water carton, and filling it with soil, putting seeds in, taping it up, and putting it outside for the winter. And I'll link a video below too to how you can do winter sowing if you're interested in starting from seed ahead of time, but you don't want to invest in a huge seed setup. Flowers that you can direct sow, I'm going to talk through. Most of these like it warm because we're in March. If you're starting now, everyone should have time to grow these because most of us are before our very last frost. Some great focal flowers are sunflowers, no surprise there, we talked through those. Zinnias, and there's so many great zinnias varieties out there. Again, just make sure you're getting a tall variety that's meant for cutting. Really great ones are Benary's Giant. They have huge flower heads, so if you're doing a lot of big flowers, maybe you want to get the Benary's Giant flowers. I loved the Queen Lime series. I have a video where I go through all of the different Queen Limes that I grew last year. The Cinderella series is really pretty too if you like that fluffy look. And I'm gonna grow Florette's zinnias this year for the very first time. Those are on the more expensive side, so we'll see how those go. I'm very interested in trying them this year. Another great focal flower that's easy to grow from seed are marigolds. Pay attention again to the type of marigold you're growing. I'm growing big white African marigolds this year, but they come in bright orange and yellow colors too that are great for the fall, or if you just want really colorful bouquets, that's a great one to grow. Just make sure you're not getting the smaller bedding varieties. And they do have a scent that not everyone loves, so just be aware of that as well. And then calendula. Calendula is one that does like it colder, so you could plant those seeds out before your last frost. They come in beautiful oranges, stunning flowers, very easy to grow. The one thing about calendulas are they tend to be aphid magnets, so if you have a lot of issues with aphids, you might want to have a backup focal flower in case those get covered in aphids. A really easy direct sown filler that most people love are cosmos. What's great about cosmos are they add some kind of airiness and movement to bouquets, and they come in beautiful colors. Some of the common ones are the double click, which are really fluffy big cosmos. I almost didn't recognize them as cosmos when I grew mine last year because they were so big, and I'll show you some pictures. The cupcakes are pretty, very thin, delicate cosmos, and then apricota is one that I grew as well that was just the most beautiful color, almost shifted depending on the light. But those are super easy to grow from seed, and you can direct sow them, and they love the warm weather. And nigella. Nigella is so easy to grow from seed. You can even direct sow it in the fall and have early spring blooms, but you can also direct sow it in the spring. What's great about nigella is the flower itself is beautiful, but if you don't get to harvesting it in time and you miss the flower, the seed pods make really cool accents to a bouquet as well. And that's something I encourage you to explore. Is there's a lot of cool things you can put in a bouquet besides just a flower. Artichokes are really interesting, poppy pods are really interesting, nigella pods are really interesting, and then echinacea. I like growing echinacea from seed. It's really easy, it's a perennial, but I like to do it for the cone heads. I take the petals off and you have these really cool bright orange cones that make you go, what is that in the bouquet? And so those are great as well. A couple other great fillers you can grow from seed and direct sow are gomphrena, which is again that ball, and then straw flower, but straw flower can be tricky to germinate. So if you are going to direct sow straw flower, I would sow it extra heavy, do a lot so that you are guaranteed to have some blooms. Hey guys, it's the next day. I'm editing this video and I realized I forgot to mention super easy filler flower to start from seed, celosia. Celosia is so easy. It loves the warm weather. You can direct sow it, and there's so many beautiful different shaped celosias out there. Some of them are weird and interesting. Some of them are just beautiful. So celosia is another one you definitely want to try. Some great disc flowers that you can direct sow. Dill, you probably see it listed as ami, and it comes in different colors. So the common dill that you would use as an herb tends to have yellow flowers, but there are white versions of ami and there are green versions of ami. Those are so easy to grow from seed. I can't stop mine from growing, but what I don't love about ami is it has that strong dill scent, which isn't necessarily something I'm looking for and might compete with other scents in the bouquet. But most people love ami in their bouquets, so if you don't mind the scent or you want to try it, I say go for it. Another really easy to grow disc flower is white finch or Leia. That was one of the easiest flowers I've grown. These beautiful white fluffy discs, but those like it cool again, so they might be blooming earlier in the season. Just keep that in mind. They're not going to be blooming late in the summer when you have some of your warmer season flowers growing, and you can plant those in the ground now while it's cold. And basil. Basil's so easy to grow from seed. You can direct sow it. I think it's one of the easiest herbs to grow from seed. And some of my favorite varieties are the dark opal, the cardinal basil, lemon basil, and cinnamon basil, which have the most amazing scents and add that nice foliage accent to your bouquets and can be sown right in the ground from seed. Some other common cut flower seeds that make great cut flowers but can be a little trickier to grow and might not be what you want to start with your first time around and do require some equipment for the most part inside, are snapdragons. Snapdragons are tiny, tiny little seeds. They need to be sown right on the surface. They need light and oxygen to germinate. So it is recommended to start them inside. They also take a little bit longer to grow, so a lot of people will start them early. But a great method, if you did buy some seed starting equipment, and if you want to start seeds indoors, I have some videos about equipment you'll need. There's tons of great other videos out there. If you're going to grow snapdragons inside, I recommend the easiest way is to just get a container, fill it with soil, moist soil, sprinkle those seeds all over the top of that soil, gently pat them in, spray them on the top to make sure that moisture is there, but gently spray them. You don't want them blowing off. Put some sort of dome, clear dome over it, and put them on a heat mat right under some lights if you can. Mine germinated so quickly that way, and then what you can do is once they're a little bit bigger, you can prick, it's called pricking them out, but you just gently take them out and then you put them in either a seed tray or a soil block. And that way you guarantee you get a ton of germination. But people have had tons of success. You can germinate them in seed trays, you can germinate them in soil blocks if you want. That's just a method that I think guarantees success. Larkspur is one I love starting from seed. You don't need indoor equipment, but it does require cold. And some seeds, again, require a cold period. Vernalization means they need to grow a little bit, have a cold winter before they'll flower, and some seeds just need to be chilled before they flower. So if you are gonna do some of those more trickier flowers, just make sure either they're pre-chilled or put them in your fridge for a little bit. And if they require a vernalization period, you're gonna wanna grow them on to a small plant in the fall. So if you didn't get to do that this year and you wanna try that, you can plant them this fall and have blooms next spring. You just might require a little more research to grow things like that. Larkspur, delphinium, and again, flower bulbs like tulips and daffodils. Okay, so that was just a few examples. There are so many beautiful flowers out there. I encourage you to go out and explore, think through what you want to grow this year. I would love for you to share with me, what are you planning on growing? And don't get discouraged if you have a plan or if you don't have enough room. You can always supplement with flowers from a grocery store or another local grower or a friend. You don't have to grow everything yourself to feel like you're an accomplished flower grower. So I can't wait to hear what you guys picked, what you're gonna grow this year. I hope you have so much fun just looking at all the gorgeous pictures out there and deciding what you wanna grow. And I hope you had as much fun planning your garden today as I did. Thanks.